Victoria Hale always said that the world was divided into two kinds of people, the ones who take and the ones who get taken from. She made sure her daughter, Madison, grew up hearing that line so often it almost sounded like a lullaby, except there was nothing soft about it. It was the kind of line that got carved into a kid's bones before they even knew what they believed in. Madison never really fit into her mother's sharp-edged world. The Hale family lived on a hill above Seattle, in a glass and steel house that looked like it was built from magazine covers. The floors shined, the walls were all expensive art and framed newspaper articles praising Victoria's real estate empire. There were no family photos on the walls, just headlines and awards and deals. Victoria loved deals more than she loved anything. Madison loved sketchbooks, old movies, and rainy walks. She loved quiet coffee shops downtown, street musicians, and people who smiled with their whole face, not just their mouth. So of course they were going to go to war someday. They just didn't know it yet. The day everything shifted, Madison was sitting on the back patio, looking out at the Seattle skyline. It was drizzling, like it almost always was, and the city lights were blurry through the mist. She had her sketchbook open, pencil between her fingers, trying to draw the way the clouds moved. Inside, through the sliding glass doors, she heard the low hum of voices. Her mother's voice was unmistakable, controlled, measured, powerful. The other voice belonged to Mark, Victoria's longtime attorney, and the closest thing she had to a friend who didn't work for her. Madison wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but when she heard her own name, the pencil stopped moving. "She's not ready, Mark. She's never going to be," Victoria said. "She's your only child. If we cut her out completely, you know she'll—" "We're not cutting her out. I'm protecting what I built. She doesn't have the gut for this. She's too gentle, too idealistic. Put the shares in the trust, transfer controlling interest to me and the board, and leave her a stipend. She'll be fine." Madison's heart thudded hard against her ribs. "It's a pretty extreme move. You're sure you want to declare her unfit to manage assets?" Madison felt cold, even out in the rain. Unfit? Manage what? Victoria's tone didn't waver. She is unfit, financially speaking. She'd give away half of this empire to some arts nonprofit or to people who smile at her in a cafe. She lives in a fantasy. I don't care what we have to file to make it legal. Draft it. I'll sign. Madison's fingers trembled around the pencil. The tip snapped. Unfit? Legal filings? Transfer of control? She stood up slowly, walked to the sliding glass door, and watched her mother's reflection as she spoke. Victoria stood near the kitchen island in one of her tailored black suits, her hair perfectly smooth, her expression calm in that hard, distant way that always made Madison feel like a guest in her own house. "Victoria," Mark said carefully, "if she finds out—" "She won't," Victoria said. "She trusts me. That's the problem." Madison stepped back from the door as if she'd been slapped. Trust. That word burned. She went upstairs, her legs feeling like they didn't quite belong to her. In her room, she stared at the walls, the plain ones, the ones she'd never been allowed to stick posters on because this house is an investment, not a dorm room. Her sketchbooks were stacked neatly on a shelf. Her clothes hung in color order in the closet. Everything looked controlled. She was 23, halfway through a design program she wasn't even sure she wanted to finish. She had always assumed there would be time to figure out who she was, because her mother's empire would cushion all the falls. Now she wasn't so sure. That night, around 1 a.m., she crept down the
be granted managing control of any of Victoria's companies. Another document assigning majority voting rights to Victoria and the board indefinitely. A final section outlining a monthly allowance that would, quote, ensure her basic needs are met. Basic needs. like some distant relative in an old money family who couldn't be trusted near a checkbook. There was even a signed statement from a therapist Madison had never met, describing her as emotionally fragile and prone to impulsive decisions. It was all there, and all of it made her small. She sank into Victoria's leather chair, the papers trembling in her hands. For a long time, she didn't move. She just sat there, listening to the hum of the city and the faint sound of rain against the glass. Eventually, she folded the documents and slid them back. She closed the drawer. She left everything exactly as it was, because that's what she'd been trained to do. Don't leave a trace. But something inside her had already started to crack. The next morning at breakfast, Victoria acted like nothing in the world was wrong. She ate sliced grapefruit and egg whites. She checked her phone every 30 seconds. She reminded Madison about a charity gala that weekend and asked if she had something presentable to wear. Madison watched her for a long moment, trying to find some hint of softness in her face. Some part of her that might say, "I love you more than I love this empire." She didn't find it. "Mom," Madison said quietly, "if I ever disappointed you badly enough, would you tell me?" Victoria looked up, surprised by the question. "What kind of disappointment are we talking about?" Madison swallowed. "The kind that makes you not trust me." Victoria set her fork down. "Maddie, trust is a luxury. I trust people only as far as their decisions show me I can." "That's a yes," Madison said, her voice barely above a whisper. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. "What's going on?" Madison stood up. "Nothing you don't already know." She went upstairs, packed a suitcase, and this time she didn't creep. She rolled the suitcase right past Victoria, who followed her into the foyer. "Madison, what are you doing?" her mother demanded. "Leaving, before you have me quietly erased out of my own life." For a second, something like guilt flickered across Victoria's face. Then it hardened. "This is exactly the drama I was trying to avoid. You forged a therapist's evaluation, you rewrote my entire future so your company wouldn't have to survive me making a donation? I did what successful people do. I safeguarded my legacy. You'll still be provided for. You're overreacting." Madison stared at her. There it was. Not our legacy, not our family's future, her legacy. "Congratulations! You finally taught me something." "What's that?" "How dangerous it is to trust the wrong person." Victoria's jaw tightened. "You walk out that door, and you don't get to walk back in every time life hits you hard." "I know," Madison said softly. "That's kind of the point." She left. It turned out that life did hit hard. The first apartment she rented in Capitol Hill was small, noisy, and smelled faintly like someone else's cooking no matter how many candles she lit. She picked up barista shifts at a coffee shop down the street, designed flyers for bands, did odd graphic design jobs online. There were nights she missed the warm floors and silent halls of the house on the hill. Nights she missed her mother in a way that didn't make sense. Because for all the hurt, her heart still carried old echoes of laughter in the car, birthday cakes, forehead kisses when she was sick. Love doesn't just switch off because you learn something awful. It lingers like smoke. But anger lingers too. And slowly her anger started to outgrow her heartbreak. She realized something one rainy night while she was wiping down tables, listening to a podcast about business turnarounds. Her mother had spent her entire life building an empire that no one could take from her. Except maybe the one person she'd taught everything to. Madison didn't suddenly become cold or ruthless. That wasn't her. But she stopped being helpless. She finished her design degree. She got a job at a small but fast-growing branding agency that worked with local startups. She learned about positioning, storytelling, digital strategy, growth. She worked with founders who weren't born into money, who fought for every inch they got. She listened. She watched. She learned. And she slowly built something on the side. It started as a simple idea: help small ethical real estate developers, people trying to build green housing, community-focused spaces, brand themselves in a way that could compete with big players. She understood the real estate world from watching Victoria. She understood people from having her heart broken by one. Within 3 years, she had her own agency. Nothing huge, no skyscrapers, no headlines, but steady clients, good word of mouth, a growing reputation in the Pacific Northwest. Her name wasn't Hale anymore, at least not in public. She went by Maddie Gray for business. It felt strange and freeing at the same time. She thought she'd moved on. Then she saw the article. Hale Properties faces regulatory scrutiny after series of unsafe building claims. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at the screen, feeling the old world brush against the new one. The article talked about cost-cutting, ignored safety reports, bribed inspectors. It mentioned a luxury condo building in downtown Seattle that had developed major structural issues less than a year after opening. The comments were brutal. People blamed greed. People blamed developers. And for the first time, people blamed Victoria by name. Madison closed her laptop and sat very still. This had nothing to do with her, except that it did. Her mother had pushed her out because she thought Madison would be too soft to handle the business. But what if softness wasn't weakness? What if softness just needed teeth? A thought formed in her mind, sharp, unwelcome, electric. She could hurt Victoria. She knew the inner workings of the company, even if it had been years. She knew the people. She knew how her mother thought. She knew that the woman who'd built her empire on control would shatter if control was taken away. She didn't decide to get revenge in one moment. It was more like a slow turn of the tide. First, she reached out to an old contact who used to work in Victoria's legal department. She did it under a false name, pretending to be part of a research group investigating corporate ethics and real estate. She asked about Hale Properties' pattern of dealing with complaints. Then she looked at public records, permits, lawsuits, property transfers. She saw a pattern that even the regulators hadn't fully pieced together yet. Hale Properties cut corners quietly. They settled quietly. They buried problems with money and NDAs. They pressured small contractors to sign lopsided deals. They moved assets through shell companies. The girl who used to doodle in the back seat while her mom took calls now understood exactly what those calls had been about. She didn't hack anything. She didn't break into any offices. She just watched, collected, and connected dots. Patiently, carefully. Her mind worked like a designer's. See the big picture, then find the lines that connect everything. One day, she realized she had enough. She created an anonymous data drop for a respected investigative journalist known for exposing corporate corruption. She didn't dramatize anything. She just laid out timelines, documents, and connections. Then she waited. 2 months later, the story broke. Behind the Glass: How Hale Properties Build Profits on Broken Promises. It was a long-form piece. It mentioned unsafe buildings, secret settlements, fake safety reports. It talked about the hollow image of the self-made real estate queen who maybe wasn't so clean after all. Her face was on every news channel for all the wrong reasons. Madison watched one of the segments from her office, the volume low. Her mother looked collected, controlled. She denied everything. She smiled at the cameras like they were old friends.
"This is a coordinated attack," Victoria said. "We have always prioritized safety and integrity. Our record speaks for itself." Madison knew that smile, knew the steel behind the words. But she also saw the tiny twitch in her mother's jaw that no one else would notice, the slight tightness in her posture, the way she blinked a little too slowly. She was rattled. It should have been enough. Madison had made her point. She'd shown her mother that she wasn't weak, but it didn't feel like enough. Victoria still had her company, her mansion, her board, her power. Madison didn't want all of that. She didn't want to become her, but she wanted one thing very badly. She wanted her mother to finally understand what it felt like to have your life rewritten by someone who thought they knew better. The next move came in a moment that should have been ordinary. Madison was in New York for a client meeting, a big potential contract that could expand her agency to the East Coast. As she walked into the lobby of the Manhattan Hotel where the meeting was scheduled, she nearly collided with a man in a gray suit coming around the corner. "Sorry," she said automatically. "No worries," he replied. "Maddie?" She blinked. "Yeah?" He smiled. "I'm Ben Carter. We've been emailing. I handle strategy for Redwood Development." He was younger than she expected, maybe early 30s, with thoughtful eyes and a kind of easy calm you don't see much in that city. They went upstairs, had their meeting, and for the first time in a while, Madison felt something shift in her life, in a good way. He was sharp, but he also listened. He asked about her work, her story, what mattered to her. They grabbed coffee afterward just to keep talking, as he put it. One coffee turned into a walk down a noisy street, then into dinner. She found herself telling him more about Seattle than she told anyone in years. Not specifics, not names, but enough. "You sound like you walked out of a billionaire drama series," he joked lightly at one point. "You have no idea," she said. The next day, he called her. "Redwood wants to bring your agency on board. And, off the record, I do too." She smiled, standing next to her hotel window looking out at a city that wasn't hers yet. "Then I guess we'll be seeing each other a lot." She did see him a lot. Over the next year, she expanded her work to New York. She split time between Seattle and Manhattan. Her agency grew. So did her feelings for Ben. She didn't plan on falling in love. It happened anyway. Quietly, then all at once, in the way he remembered how she took her coffee, how he noticed when she needed silence instead of talking, how he never flinched at her ambition. The problem wasn't him. The problem was that her mother still lived in her chest like a ghost. She hadn't spoken to Victoria in almost 4 years. Not one call, not one text. There were times she almost picked up her phone, and there were times she asked herself what she would do if her mother called first. Victoria didn't. The second wave of trouble for Hale Properties came from somewhere entirely different: the board. After the article, after regulators started circling, some of the board members began to worry about their own reputations. Victoria tried to hold them together, but cracks were forming. Madison found out from Mark. He called her out of the blue, his number popping up on her screen like a ghost. She answered on instinct. "Hello?" There was a short pause. "Madison?" She almost hung up. Instead, she said, "You've got 10 seconds before I block you." He exhaled. "I deserve that. I really do. But this is something you'll want to hear." She stayed quiet. Victoria may be indestructible in her own mind, but the board isn't. They're scared. They're looking at exit strategies. There's talk of selling off stakes, bringing in new partners.
The wrong people buy in, she'll double down on everything and the company will get even uglier. "This sounds like a you problem," Madison said tightly. "It's a you problem too," he replied. "You may not want her empire, but you're tied to it whether you like it or not. As long as she's out there using your name, buying influence, burying things, she's a shadow over your life." "I don't use her name," Madison said. "The world doesn't care," he replied gently. "They see Hale. And whether you believe it or not, one day you'll want the option to define what that name means." She went quiet. "What do you want, Mark?" she finally asked. "I want you to know you have leverage. There are shareholders who would support a leadership change if the right alternative showed up. They're tired of crisis mode. They're tired of covering for her." She almost laughed. "Are you seriously suggesting a corporate coup? Do you hear yourself?" "Yeah, I do. I'm suggesting the one thing she never saw coming, the one thing she spent your entire life making sure you'd never try. And that is you taking back what she stole." She hung up. But the idea stayed.
It sat with her through the night, through the New York noise outside her window, through Ben's careful questions when he saw her mood shift. "Hey," he said one night, sitting across from her on her couch, take-out containers on the coffee table. "You're doing that thing again." "What thing?" "Staring at the wall like it insulted your entire bloodline." She huffed out a small laugh. "Sorry, just old stuff." He picked at his food. "You know, I don't need to know details, but if something or someone back home is still hurting you, maybe the only way to deal with it is to stop letting it live rent-free in your head." She looked at him, hair messy, t-shirt soft from too many washes, eyes open and honest. "What if stopping it means doing something I'm not sure I like?" she asked quietly. "Like what?" he said. She considered telling him everything. Instead, she said, "Like becoming a little more like the person who hurt me." He thought about that. You don't have to become them, you just have to be willing to stop being their victim. That line settled deep. Stop being the victim. 1 week later, Madison flew back to Seattle. The Hale house on the hill looked exactly the same from the outside, completely untouched, like time didn't exist inside those walls. She parked a rental car outside the gate, sat for a minute with her hands on the wheel, then buzzed in. The intercom crackled. A familiar voice came through. The housekeeper, Rosa. "Hello?" "Hi, Rosa. It's Maddie." There was a sharp inhale, then, "Oh my God, Madison! 1 second." The gates opened. She walked up the long driveway, feeling like a ghost visiting her own past. Rosa met her at the door and pulled her into a tight hug. "Look at you," Rosa whispered. "You look happy." "I'm working on it." "Your mother doesn't know you're here," Rosa murmured. "She's in her office." "Good," Madison replied. She walked down the hallway, her footsteps barely making a sound on the polished floors. She stopped outside the office door, the same one she'd broken into years ago. This time, she knocked. "Come in," Victoria called. Madison opened the door and stepped inside. Her mother looked up and froze. She looked older, sharper around the eyes, but still put together. There were more files on the desk than before, more stress in the lines around her mouth. For a second, neither of them said anything. Then Victoria whispered, "Madison." "Hi, Mom." Silence again. Thick and complicated. "You look different," Victoria said finally. "New York suits you." "How do you know I'm in New York?" Madison asked. Her lips twitched. "You think I wouldn't keep track of my own daughter? You didn't act like you had one for the last 4 years. Something flickered in her eyes. "Sit," she said. "I won't take much of your time," Madison said. Victoria leaned back. "Then get to the point." Madison remembered that tone, that impatience. It oddly made her feel steadier. "I know about the board," Madison said. "I know about the investigations. I know you're losing control." Victoria smiled tightly. "You've been busy. Is this about the article?" "You brought that on yourself. This is something else." "And what would that be?" "A proposal," Madison said. "You're always giving those to people. Thought I'd return the favor."
The wrong people buy in, she'll double down on everything, and the company will get even uglier. "This sounds like a you problem," Madison said tightly. "It's a you problem too," he replied. "You may not want her empire, but you're tied to it whether you like it or not. As long as she's out there using your name, buying influence, burying things, she's a shadow over your life." "I don't use her name," Madison said. "The world doesn't care," he replied gently. "They see Hale. And whether you believe it or not, one day you'll want the option to define what that name means." She went quiet. "What do you want, Mark?" she finally asked. "I want you to know you have leverage. There are shareholders who would support a leadership change if the right alternative showed up. They're tired of crisis mode. They're tired of covering for her." She almost laughed. "Are you seriously suggesting a corporate coup? Do you hear yourself?" "Yeah," he said. "I do. I'm suggesting the one thing she never saw coming, the one thing she spent your entire life making sure you'd never try. And that is? You taking back what she stole.
She hung up. But the idea stayed. It sat with her through the night, through the New York noise outside her window, through Ben's careful questions when he saw her mood shift. "Hey," he said one night, sitting across from her on her couch, takeout containers on the coffee table. "You're doing that thing again." "What thing?" "Staring at the wall like it insulted your entire bloodline?" She huffed out a small laugh. "Sorry, just old stuff." He picked at his food. "You know, I don't need to know details, but if something or someone back home is still hurting you, maybe the only way to deal with it is to stop letting it live rent-free in your head." She looked at him, hair messy, t-shirt soft from too many washes, eyes open and honest. "What if stopping it means doing something I'm not sure I like?" she asked quietly. "Like what?" he said. She considered telling him everything. Instead, she said, "Like becoming a little more like the person who hurt me." He thought about that. You don't have to become them. You just have to be willing to stop being their victim. That line settled deep. Stop being the victim. 1 week later, Madison flew back to Seattle. The Hale house on the hill looked exactly the same from the outside, completely untouched, like time didn't exist inside those walls. She parked a rental car outside the gate, sat for a minute with her hands on the wheel, then buzzed in. The intercom crackled. A familiar voice came through. The housekeeper, Rosa. "Hello?" "Hi, Rosa. It's Maddie." There was a sharp inhale. Then, "Oh my God, Madison!" "1 second." The gates opened. She walked up the long driveway, feeling like a ghost visiting her own past. Rosa met her at the door and pulled her into a tight hug. "Look at you," Rosa whispered. "You look happy." "I'm working on it." "Your mother doesn't know you're here," Rosa murmured. "She's in her office." "Good," Madison replied. She walked down the hallway, her footsteps barely making a sound on the polished floors. She stopped outside the office door, the same one she'd broken into years ago. This time, she knocked. "Come in," Victoria called. Madison opened the door and stepped inside. Her mother looked up and froze. She looked older, sharper around the eyes, but still put together. There were more files on the desk than before, more stress in the lines around her mouth. For a second, neither of them said anything. Then Victoria whispered, "Madison." "Hi, Mom," Madison said. Silence again. Thick and complicated. "You look different," Victoria said finally. "New York suits you." "How do you know I'm in New York?" Madison asked. Victoria's lips twitched. "You think I wouldn't keep track of my own daughter? You didn't act like you had one for the last 4 years." Something flickered in her eyes. "Sit," she said. Madison stayed standing. "I won't take much of your time." Victoria leaned back. "Then get to the point." Madison remembered that tone, that impatience. It oddly made her feel steadier. "I know about the board. I know about the investigations. I know you're losing control." Victoria smiled tightly. "You've been busy. Is this about the article?" "You brought that on yourself. This is something else." "And what would that be?" her mother asked. "A proposal. You're always giving those to people. Thought I'd return the favor."
"I don't want to save the world," Madison said. "I just don't want to keep hurting people as the cost of doing business." Victoria looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. "Do you hate me?" she asked, very quietly, without any of the armor. Madison felt that question in her chest like a punch. There were so many answers. Yes, for what you did. No, because I remember the nights you stayed up with me when I was sick. Maybe, only when I think too much. Somehow. She picked one she could live with. "I don't trust you," she said. "Not with my life. Not with my choices. Not yet." Victoria nodded slowly. "That's fair. But," Madison added, surprising herself, "I also don't wake up every day wishing you'd fall off the face of the earth anymore. So I guess that's progress? Her mother huffed out something that was almost a laugh. Your standards are brutal. They're yours, Madison said. They met each other's eyes, and for a second, the war faded, and they were just two women who'd spent too long hurting each other because they didn't know how else to be. Months turned into years. Hale Properties changed in ways that made headlines again, but for once in a good way. Articles talked about a new direction, about a second-generation leader pushing for ethics in an industry that rarely used the word. Madison's own agency continued to run, staffed by people she trusted. She made sure it stayed separate, clean. She didn't want to mix her mother's history with her own, as much as the news tried to. Sometimes she thought about that girl on the patio with a pencil in her hand, listening to her future get erased through a piece of glass. She wanted to go back and tell her, "You will get it back. Not in the way you expected. Not cleanly, but you will." Her revenge didn't end in sirens or handcuffs or one dramatic public humiliation. It ended in rooms with contracts and quiet decisions. It ended in her taking a pen and signing her name under titles she wasn't supposed to have. It ended not when her mother lost everything, but when Madison finally stopped letting her mother define who she was allowed to be. One night, years after that first confrontation in the office, Madison stood on the same hill, outside the same house, watching the Seattle lights blink through the misty rain. Beside her, Ben slipped his hand into hers. He had moved to Seattle for her eventually, splitting his own time between coasts. They weren't married yet. They weren't in any rush. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was running out of time. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," she said. "Just thinking." "Dangerous," he teased. She smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "Do you ever think about how weird this is? Me working in that house, trying to fix the thing that broke me?" "All the time," he said. "But I also think maybe that's the only way to make sure it doesn't break anyone else." The front door opened behind them. Victoria stepped out, wrapped in a coat, her hair up, her heels clicking softly on the stone. "You two staying for dinner or just using my view?" she called. "We'll stay," Madison said. Victoria walked toward them. She looked smaller outside the house, less like a statue and more like a person. As she came close, Madison saw the worry in her eyes, the quiet question she didn't know how to ask out loud. "Are you still here? Are you still choosing to be?" Madison wasn't done being angry. Maybe she never would be. Not completely. Some wounds don't close. They just scar over. But she was done being powerless. She squeezed Ben's hand, then let go, and walked forward. "Come on," she said. "Let's eat." For a moment, the three of them stood there, at the edge of the hill, looking down at the city that had watched their entire war without ever really knowing. Then they turned back toward the house, toward the complicated thing they were still building and rebuilding, a company, a legacy, a family. A mother's need for control once rewrote a daughter's life. A daughter's quiet, relentless revenge had rewritten it again. And in the end, the most unexpected part of the story wasn't the fall. It was the fact that after all the damage, both of them were still standing. And this time, the daughter was standing on her own terms.